When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me looked sterile and too white, like it had never known a touch of life. I heard faint beeping, a slow rhythm of machines breathing for someone. It took me a few seconds to realize that someone was me. My mouth was dry, my hands heavy, and a strange chill ran through my veins, as if the world had forgotten I existed. A nurse noticed my movement, gasped, and ran out shouting, "She's awake! She's awake!" I didn't understand the panic. I didn't understand anything. My name was Margaret Hill. At least, that's what I remembered. But the world I woke up to didn't feel like mine anymore. The doctor came in, disbelief painted across his face. "Mrs. Hill, this is remarkable. You've been in a coma for 6 months. We thought you wouldn't make it." 6 months. That word fell like a stone in my chest. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. "Where's my family?" He hesitated, glancing at the nurse. Your family held a funeral, Mrs. Hill. They believed you passed away." I stared at him, my pulse thundering. "Funeral?" I croaked. "What do you mean, a funeral?" He explained how my car was found crumpled at the bottom of a ravine last winter. They found a burnt body in the wreckage, unrecognizable, but they assumed it was me because my purse and ID were in the car. DNA, he said, was inconclusive because of the damage, and since I was missing for weeks, they declared me dead. I couldn't move. My mind reeled back to that night, the snowstorm, the spinning headlights, the sound of metal folding like paper, then darkness. Nothing after that. I should have died, but somehow I didn't. When I was strong enough to stand, I begged the doctor to let me leave. He wanted to keep me for observation, but I had only one thought: my family, my husband, Richard, my daughter, Clara, my little grandson, Daniel. They had buried someone else, thinking it was me. I needed to go home, to hold them, to tell them I was alive. The taxi ride to my house felt surreal. The streets were familiar yet strange, as if time had brushed a new coat of reality over everything. The garden fence Richard had promised to fix was now painted white. The roses I loved so dearly were gone, replaced by trimmed hedges. I remember gripping my bag tighter, feeling a lump in my throat as I approached the front door. Through the window, I saw them, my husband sitting at the dining table, laughing, my daughter pouring wine into glasses, my grandson playing on the floor. For a fleeting second, my heart flooded with relief until I saw her, a woman, younger than me, sitting beside Richard. Her hand rested on his arm like she belonged there. She was wearing my apron. I froze. I wanted to believe I was hallucinating, but when Richard leaned over and kissed her on the cheek, something inside me cracked. My body trembled. My heart screamed, "I'm alive! I'm right here!" But my voice was gone. I knocked. The laughter stopped. The door opened after a long pause, and my daughter stood there, her face pale as snow. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "Mom?" as if she'd seen a ghost. When Richard appeared behind her, he dropped the glass he was holding. It shattered just like the world I thought I knew. "Margaret?" he whispered, stepping back. "But you're dead." I smiled through tears. I thought I was too. No one moved. Even my little grandson stared, clutching his toy car in silence. Then Richard did something I didn't expect. He didn't embrace me. He didn't cry. He just stood there, shaking his head, whispering again and again, "This can't be real." The young woman, she was the first to move. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes and said quietly, "Who are you?" Richard turned to her. This is my wife." Her expression changed, first confusion, then guilt. My stomach dropped. The way she looked at him told me everything. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a friend. She was his. I felt my knees weaken. Clara caught me before I fell, guiding me inside. The familiar scent of home hit me like a wave, fresh bread, lavender cleaner, but it all felt wrong. The family portraits on the wall were gone. My chair near the window replaced by a modern couch. Even my curtains had been changed. My presence had been erased. As I sat there, trembling, Clara handed me water. "Mom, we buried you. We cried for you. We tried to move on." She glanced at Richard, who avoided my eyes. "Dad!" "He met Susan after the funeral." "Susan?" The name buzzed in my ears like a curse. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved for 40 years. "You remarried?" My voice cracked. He rubbed his temples, his voice low. "I thought you were gone, Margaret. I couldn't live alone forever. I wanted to scream that 6 months wasn't forever. That I had lain in a hospital bed, breathing, waiting to wake up. But the words stuck like ice in my throat. Instead, I looked at my grandson, sweet Daniel, who came closer, touching my hand gently. "Grandma?" he whispered. Tears streamed down my face as I pulled him into my arms. His warmth reminded me I was still real. But inside that house, I wasn't alive. I was a ghost who'd walked in on her own replacement. That night, they let me stay in the guest room. Guest room! My room, our room, was now Richard and Susan's. The walls that once held our memories now echoed with someone else's laughter. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The accident, the darkness, the moment I saw them all living without me. They had built a life that didn't include me, moved on, replaced me. And as the clock struck midnight, I realized something else, something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. If I was declared dead, then who was buried in my grave? I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like an old memory protesting the new paint, the new voices. Around 3 in the morning, I slipped out of the guest bed and padded down the hall, barefoot, holding the wall like it could keep me steady in this life that didn't recognize me. The door to my old bedroom was ajar. Soft murmurs coiled through the crack. Richard's voice, lower than a prayer, and hers, too careful to be accidental. "I can't do this if she stays," Susan whispered. "Everything is complicated now." "It's not like I planned this," Richard said, and I heard the ache in his throat. "She's alive. What do you want me to say?" "I want to know what happens to us," she said. "To me." There was a long silence. I imagined him rubbing his temples, that old habit of his, when the world pressed too hard. I wanted to fling the door wide open and demand to know when she had become us and I had become complication. Instead, I walked away before I dissolved into the carpet. Morning came weak and grey. Clara made coffee as if the motion could stitch yesterday into something survivable. She set a mug in front of me, then reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. "I know this is impossible," she said, her voice trembling, "but I'm so glad you're here." "Your father?" I asked, too carefully. "He needs time," she said. "He really believed. We all did. I didn't ask him to stop believing," I said, "and it came out harsher than I meant. I asked him not to forget." Daniel woke up late and came padding in with a blanket on his shoulders, hair sticking up like a little halo. He climbed onto my lap without asking. "Did you sleep at our house, Grandma?" "I did," I whispered, pressing my nose to his hair and memorizing the place where I still existed without argument. "I did. By 10 we were in the car, Clara driving, because my hands shook. The January light laid a cold sheet over the town. The cemetery wasn't far, just past the church with the bell that used to ring for weddings, then for funerals, then for me. We parked beneath an elm whose branches looked like black lace against the sky. I braced myself for my name carved in stone. It was there, clean and obedient as all true things are when carved deep enough. Margaret Hill, beloved wife and mother. 1958 2024. I stared at the dash between those numbers and felt like it had cleaved me in half. The flowers had been changed recently, winter roses, artificial, too bright. A ribbon around them read, "We love you, Maggie." The handwriting was Clara's. "I'm sorry," she said, a tear escaping before she could catch it. "We didn't know about the mix-up with the body. The coroner told us the condition. They said a closed casket was best." "Who identified me?" I asked. Clara swallowed. "Dad did. There was your purse, your necklace. They said the DMV picture matched enough. And..." She stared at the grass. "We were so tired from searching you, Mom. It felt like someone was giving us permission to stop bleeding." The wind carried a faint scent of damp earth and old metal. I knelt. The ground was sunken just slightly, the way it gets after the first season settles the soil. My eyes drifted to a knot of wilted wildflowers tucked behind the headstone, half hidden. They weren't from the florist. They were plucked by fingers that had known where to find them. A small folded paper was tied to the stems with kitchen twine, water-stained but legible in a careful, cramped hand. "Forgive me, Anna." My breath fogged in the air. "Who is Anna?" I whispered. Clara frowned. "I don't know anyone named Anna." I slid the note free, the paper puckered and soft from cold. On the back, barely visible under the water stains, was a phone number. The last 2 digits had bled into each other, but the rest stood clear. My heart beat in my throat like I'd swallowed a drum. "Mom?" Clara said. I tucked the note into my coat pocket like a stolen treasure. "Nothing. Just a strange thing. The pastor, an old friend with a face mapped by kindness, saw us from the chapel path and came over, arms open. By God," he breathed when he reached me. "Margaret?" His eyes filled. He hugged me like he'd just thrown a rope to someone who'd been drowning alone. "You have no idea how many prayers we said." I tried to smile. Maybe one of them found me. He glanced at the headstone, then back at me. "We can arrange to correct the records with the church office. And if you need to speak to the county, I can make some calls. There will be paperwork." He hesitated. "And conversations. Conversations," I repeated. The word felt endless. "Did you see her?" "Her?" "At the funeral," I said, trying to sound casual. "A woman. Someone you didn't know. Leaving flowers." He rubbed his jaw. "It was crowded, honey. I remember faces softened by grief and winter hats pulled low. But I do remember a woman who stood in the back, near the door, didn't come forward for communion. She left early. Small dark coat, a scarf with blue threads." He closed his eyes, trying to summon her. "I thought she was one of Richard's colleagues' wives. We left the cemetery with the number burning a hole in my pocket. On the drive back, I watched familiar streets pass in strange silence. The bakery with the bell on the door, the pharmacy where the pharmacist used to slip Daniel a lollipop when I picked up my arthritis pills. New storefronts had appeared like replacement teeth. I felt both remembered and replaced. Back at the house, Susan was at the sink, hands in soapy water, sleeves rolled. She looked up when we entered, lips parting like a curtain. "How was it?" she asked, then seemed to realize the absurdity of the question and looked down. I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked lightly. "For asking? For being here?" "For all of it," she said, and her voice cracked around the edges. "I know I don't have the right words." "You have the right apron," I murmured, and the moment flashed with something mean in me. She took it off without comment and folded it carefully on the counter. Richard came in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag that used to belong to our garden tools. His eyes flicked from my face to Clara's, to the invisible frost we'd left behind us. "Everything okay?" "We visited my grave," I said. "It was very tidy." He flinched, just a fraction. "I'm sorry. Margaret?" "How long after the funeral did you meet her?" I asked, nodding toward Susan but keeping my eyes on him. He stared at the rag, at the floor, at the drawer he opened and closed. "A month," he said at last. I couldn't sleep. There was a grief group at the church. She was there for her own reasons. We talked. It helped to have someone who wasn't me." I finished. "I suppose that would make it easier." He looked up then, and whatever defense he had prepared withered. "I loved you," he said. "I didn't stop." "That sentence has 2 tenses," I said. "Pick one." Clara made a small sound, like a plea for gentleness from both of us. The kettle started to whistle. Susan switched it off and fled down the hall, the weight of not belonging at war with the weight of having been invited. I took out the note at the kitchen table. "Who is Anna?" I asked softly. "More to the room than to anyone." Richard frowned. "Anna?" I told them about the flowers, the hidden note, the number blurred at the end like a tear had fallen and dragged it across the paper. Susan stepped back into the doorway, her expression strained. "Maybe it's the person who was in the car." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's the person who loved the person who was in the car." An hour later, when the house fractured into small tasks, Daniel in his room building a city with plastic bricks, Clara on the phone with the hospital verifying release forms, Richard in the garage pretending the brakes on the lawnmower required urgent attention, I slipped outside with my old cell phone, the one Clara had pulled from a drawer like an artifact. The screen was spidered but alive, the battery a fragile sliver of red stubbornness. The number from the note stared back at me. I dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3. I almost hung up, suddenly absurdly frightened by the idea that answering this call would alter the shape of the air. A woman answered on the 4th ring, her voice hoarse and alert. "Hello?" I swallowed. "I found your flowers." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "Who is this?" "This is Margaret," I said. "Margaret Hill." Another silence, this one different, like someone's hands had just slipped from the edge of a cliff. When she spoke, the voice trembled. "That can't be. Margaret is dead." "I was," I said carefully, "but I'm not." A sound that might have been a sob, or a laugh, or both. "Then who did we bury?" "That's what I'm calling to ask." I braced my hand against the porch railing. "Are you Anna?" "No," she whispered. "Anna is my daughter." The world lurched. "Your daughter?" "She went missing the night of the snowstorm," the woman said. "Her car was found abandoned near the ravine, but the police said... They said a different body had been recovered from a different vehicle, and everyone got confused. And then the state said the remains matched a local missing woman with your name, and..." Her voice shattered and reassembled. "I kept coming to that grave because I didn't know where else to put my flowers. I didn't know where else to speak to her. I closed my eyes. The porch railing was cold under my palm. "What's your name?" "Marina," she said. "Marina Cole. Marina," I repeated, feeling a strand pull tight between our lives. I think the state was wrong. I think there are 2 women lost in that winter, and someone decided one answer was enough. She started to cry then, quietly, like someone who had learned to be considerate even with grief. When she could speak, her voice was smaller. "If you're alive, then there's still a chance for my Anna." I looked back through the kitchen window at the outline of my husband moving through the house I no longer recognized. "There's a chance for both of us," I said. "Will you meet me?" she asked. I tightened my grip on the railing until my knuckles whitened. "Yes," I said. "Bring anything of hers you can. A photo. Something she wore that night." The call ended. The winter light had shifted, laying a pale gold on the hedges that had replaced my roses. Somewhere inside, a toy car clattered, and Daniel laughed. The sound lifted the air, then set it down again. I slid the note back into my pocket. I was alive, but everything else was up for verification: marriage, memory, death. I had walked into a house where my chair was gone and my name was carved into stone. Now a stranger's mother had found me by accident, and together we were about to pull on a thread that might unravel 2 funerals, 1 marriage, and an entire winter's worth of lies. The next morning, frost painted the windows like lace, and the world looked as if it were holding its breath. I didn't tell anyone about my plan to meet Marina. Something inside me warned that sharing it would complicate things further, especially with Richard pacing the house, already uncertain of what to do with the wife who came back from the dead. I wore the same gray coat I'd worn before the accident. It still smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. As I walked down the road toward the small cafe near the river, I felt as if I were walking into two lives at once, the one I'd lost and the one that was demanding I start over. Marina was already there when I arrived, a thin woman with soft gray curls and a scarf that looked handmade, blue threads woven through just like the pastor had described. She looked up from her tea and froze when she saw me. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were kind, filled with something between fear and hope. "You look," she began, her voice faltering. "You look alive." I smiled faintly. "So they keep telling me." We sat in silence for a while, the clatter of cups around us filling the space between us. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo. "This is Anna," she said, sliding it across the table. The girl in the picture couldn't have been older than 25. Brown hair, soft smile, eyes full of life. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. There was something in her face, something almost familiar, a faint resemblance I couldn't quite place. "She worked at the hospital," Marina said quietly, "as a nursing assistant." The night of the storm, she was driving home from a double shift. The police said her car must have skidded off the road near the ravine, but they never found her body. They found yours instead. I swallowed hard, and when they identified it as me, they closed your daughter's case. Marina nodded slowly. Yes, they said there was only one female body recovered from that area that night, so it must have been you. But when they showed me the personal effects, none of it belonged to Anna. They wouldn't listen. They said the case was settled. Her voice broke slightly. So I kept coming to your grave. I didn't know who else to talk to. The world tilted a little around me. Somewhere between my so-called death and her daughter's disappearance, someone had stitched together a convenient lie to avoid a mess of truth. "Do you still have her things?" I asked. "Yes." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small pendant, a silver locket shaped like a heart. "She never took this off," she said, opening it. Inside was a tiny photo of Marina and a pressed daisy. "They never found this at the scene." I took the locket gently, feeling its weight. If she wasn't in the car, then who was? Marina looked at me with eyes that had already considered every possibility. Someone who wanted to disappear, or someone who was supposed to. We talked for nearly 2 hours, tracing the details of that night. The snowstorm had caused several accidents in the area. Roads were closed, reports delayed. It was chaos enough for a mix-up to hide something much darker. When we parted, she touched my arm. "Margaret," she said softly, "sometimes people don't come back because they can't, and sometimes they're not allowed to." That sentence clung to me all the way home. When I stepped through the front door, the smell of stew filled the air. Susan was cooking, humming to herself like she belonged there. Clara was helping Daniel with a puzzle on the floor, their laughter light and easy. Richard was reading the paper, pretending not to notice the invisible wall between us. He looked up when I entered. "Where did you go?" "For a walk," I said evenly. "I needed air." He folded the paper and studied me. "You're hiding something." I smiled faintly. "So are you." His jaw tightened. "Don't start this again, Margaret." "Start what?" "Asking questions?" I stepped closer, my voice low. "Tell me, Richard, how did my car end up at the bottom of that ravine if I wasn't driving it?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the police report said they found a body in my car, burned beyond recognition. But if I survived the crash, if I crawled out, wandered unconscious, whatever happened then, who stayed inside?" He hesitated. "The report said—" "I've read it," I interrupted, "and the report was vague, conveniently vague." He stood, his face pale. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying someone wanted me gone, Richard, and maybe they got more than they bargained for." The room went cold. Clara looked up, startled, while Susan froze mid-step, spoon in hand. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but said nothing. Instead, he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Clara came to me. "Mom, what's going on?" I took her hand. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." That night, when the house had gone quiet, I sat in the dark with the locket on my lap, running my thumb over its smooth edges. I couldn't shake the feeling that Anna's disappearance and my supposed death were connected. And Richard, my Richard, knew more than he was saying. The next day, I went back to the hospital. The nurse at the front desk looked surprised when I introduced myself. "Margaret Hill?" she repeated. "You were one of the miracle cases. We thought you'd passed away." "I need to speak to the records department," I said, "about the night of my accident." She led me to a small office filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, searched the archives and handed me a folder. Inside were photos of the wreck, notes from the EMTs, and one signature that stopped me cold. The person who had identified the body wasn't Richard. It was Susan. My breath hitched. I stared at the signature again, tracing the loops of her name. "Susan Miller," it read, dated 2 days after the crash, before my family had even been informed. I left the hospital trembling. The snow crunched under my feet as I walked, my mind spinning. Susan had known I was dead before anyone else. She'd identified the body. She'd moved into my home weeks later. It wasn't coincidence. When I returned home, she was in the living room, folding laundry. I watched her for a long moment. The neatness of her motions, the ease with which she existed in my space. Then I said, "You were the one who told them I was dead." Her hands froze. "What? The hospital records?" I said. "Your signature is there." Her face drained of color. Richard asked me to help. He was in shock. He couldn't. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, slamming the folder onto the table. "You identified a body that wasn't mine. Why?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were guilt or fear. "You don't understand, Margaret. It wasn't supposed to be you." My blood turned to ice. "What does that mean?" She looked away, shaking her head. "It was supposed to end differently." "End?" I whispered. End how? Before she could answer, the door opened. Richard stood there, pale and shaken, as if he'd heard everything. His eyes darted between us, and then he whispered, almost to himself, "It wasn't supposed to come back." For the first time, I realized he wasn't talking about me. The silence that followed could have split the house in two. My heart pounded so violently that it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. Richard's face had gone gray, and his eyes, those familiar blue eyes I'd once trusted, looked like glass about to crack. I rose slowly. "What do you mean, Richard?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What wasn't supposed to come back?" He rubbed his forehead, then his eyes, as if hoping that when he opened them again, I'd be gone. "Margaret," he murmured, "please, don't do this right now." "Don't what?" "Don't ask why my own husband let another woman bury me. Don't ask why she signed my death papers." Susan's breathing quickened. "She doesn't need to know, Richard." I turned sharply. "Don't I?" He glared at Susan. "Stop. Just stop talking." But she didn't. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You should have told her. You can't hide it anymore." My stomach dropped. I looked between them, the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves in a way I didn't want to see. Hide what? Richard finally looked at me, and in that single glance I saw a lifetime unravel. "Margaret," he said softly, "the night of your accident, you weren't alone in that car." The room tilted. "What?" "There was someone else," he continued. "I didn't know until the police report came, but—" He stopped, his throat closing. "Who?" He hesitated, and the pause was long enough for me to fill in every terrible blank myself. Susan stepped forward, her face pale. "It was my sister." The words hung between us like a slow explosion. "Your sister?" I repeated. "She was with Richard that night," Susan said. "They were—" She looked down, unable to finish. I stared at Richard. "You were with her sister?" His eyes burned with shame. "We'd been talking. After one of the grief meetings, she was struggling. I was—" He swallowed hard. "I made a mistake. We were driving back that night when the storm hit. She lost control of the car. I told her to slow down, and the next thing I knew, we were spinning. I crawled out before the car went up in flames. My breath came in short, broken bursts. You left her?" "She was gone," he said helplessly. "I thought I'd die if I stayed. I went for help, but by the time I came back, the car was unrecognizable. The police assumed the woman inside was you because your license and purse were found near the wreck. I didn't correct them. I couldn't. I took a step back. You let them bury me because you didn't want anyone to know you were with another woman." He looked at me, hollow. "I thought it would be better that way, cleaner. If people believed you died alone, no one would ask questions. No one would know what I did," Susan whispered through tears. "He didn't mean to fall for her. She was fragile. He was grieving. It just happened." "Don't defend him," I shouted. The sound ripped from me, raw and shaking. "You stood in my kitchen wearing my apron while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting to breathe. You buried me, Susan. You put flowers on my grave. I didn't know you were alive." she said, sobbing. I thought I turned on Richard again. And when you married her, did you tell her whose ghost was walking between you every day? He pressed his hands to his face. I was drowning, Margaret. You have no idea what that kind of guilt does. Oh, I do, I said quietly, because I'm the one who lived it. The room spun. I couldn't stand to look at either of them. I went to the door and stepped outside into the bitter evening air. My breath came in clouds, trembling as much as my hands. The truth burned inside me ugly, sharp, undeniable. My husband hadn't just buried me to escape grief. He'd buried me to hide a scandal. And yet there was still one more name haunting me, Anna. If Richard's mistress had been Susan's sister, then who was Marina's missing daughter? Unless... The realization struck like lightning. The body in my car wasn't Richard's lover. It was someone else entirely. The next morning, I called Marina and told her everything. The affair, the accident, the lies. She listened quietly, then said, I knew it wasn't over. The girl in that grave wasn't my Anna either. We agreed to meet again, this time at the old county records office, where all accident and morgue files were kept. It smelled like dust and forgotten things. The clerk, an old man with coffee-stained fingers, pulled the files reluctantly. There was a second body found a few days after that storm, he said. Different site, same ravine area. They never identified her. Young female, early 20s. No dental records match. My skin went cold. And where is she now? He shrugged. Unclaimed remains. Buried in the county lot. Marina's hand trembled as she clutched the counter. That could be her, my Anna. I nodded slowly. Or it could be the woman from my car, if someone switched reports. The clerk frowned. There was confusion that week. Power outages, delayed reports. Files went missing for days. Marina's voice was barely a whisper. You think someone covered it up? I think someone needed the body in my car to be identified quickly, I said. And that someone was Richard or Susan. When I returned home that evening, Clara met me at the door, her face tight with worry. Mom, you need to hear this, she said. She turned on the television. A reporter stood in front of the county police department. Authorities have reopened the 2024 snowstorm case after a woman declared dead was found alive. Investigators are now questioning the accuracy of multiple identifications made that week, including a missing young nurse, Anna Cole, whose mother claims was misidentified. The husband of the revived woman, Richard Hill, is cooperating with investigators. My legs nearly gave out. He called them, I whispered. Clara looked at me, tears in her eyes. He said he couldn't keep the secret anymore. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, coming closer. Moments later, police cars pulled up in front of the house. Flashing lights painted the walls red and blue. Richard stood on the porch, waiting. When he saw me, his face was pale, almost relieved. I told them everything, he said softly, about the accident, about Susan's sister, about how I ran. I can't live like this anymore, Margaret. The officers led him to the car. He didn't resist. As they drove away, Susan collapsed on the steps, sobbing. Clara held me as the cold wind bit our faces. Everything that had been buried was clawing its way back to the surface. That night, I stood by the window, watching the empty driveway. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was hollow, because, even though I was alive, the woman who came back wasn't the same one who'd died, and I still didn't know who was really lying in my grave. The following days felt like living inside a slow-moving dream where every breath echoed off the walls of an empty house. The world around me moved on, but I was stuck between headlines, police questions, and the stares of neighbors who whispered when I passed. They called me the woman who came back from the dead, but I didn't feel resurrected. I felt like evidence. Detectives came every morning. They wanted timelines, details, receipts, every scrap of memory I had from that night. I told them what I remembered: the snow, the blinding light, the impact, then darkness. I didn't remember who was beside me, if anyone. The rest was blank, as if someone had stitched that piece of time shut. Richard was still in custody, awaiting a hearing. Susan had packed a small bag and left quietly one dawn, leaving behind my apron on the kitchen table and a short note that said, "I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for it to happen this way." Clara stayed by my side, trying to hold us both together. "You should let it rest, Mom," she said one night as we sat by the fire. "You're alive. That's what matters. Alive." The word sounded thin, like a candle flame about to go out. "Someone isn't," I murmured. "Someone's daughter. Someone's sister. Someone's truth." She sighed, knowing it was useless to argue. "You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone," I said softly. "Just the truth." The next morning, I met Marina at the county coroner's office. Her eyes were red, her scarf wrapped tightly against the cold. The clerk led us to a small room with file boxes stacked against the walls. He opened one and pulled out a sealed envelope. "You asked about the unidentified female from the storm," he said. "She was moved to the archives last spring, but we still have her personal effects." He opened a drawer and placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was a silver bracelet, bent slightly from impact. Marina's hands trembled as she lifted it. "This was Anna's," she whispered. "Her father gave it to her on her 18th birthday. Tears filled her eyes, spilling silently. It's her. I placed my hand over hers. Then we'll give her the dignity she was denied." The coroner nodded. "We can release her remains to you, ma'am. I'll start the paperwork." Marina cried quietly, and for the first time I saw grief begin to soften in her eyes, grief that had been frozen for too long. As I helped her to her car afterward, she turned to me and said something that chilled me to the bone. "Do you know what's strange, Margaret? When I first spoke to the detective after the crash, he told me something I never forgot. He said they found traces of blood on the driver's side door that didn't match the victim's DNA. They assumed it belonged to whoever rescued her, but they never found that person." I froze. "Blood? Mine?" She shook her head. "No, the DNA was male." For a moment, everything around us, the wind, the sound of cars passing, the cry of distant gulls, seemed to stop. Male. The word sat heavy in my chest. Could it have been Richard? Or someone else entirely? When I got home, I went straight to the attic. It was filled with boxes that hadn't been touched since before the accident. Among them was a small wooden chest, one Richard and I used to store old photos. I lifted the lid and saw stacks of albums, envelopes, and mementos. One envelope caught my eye. Insurance car and life policies. Inside I found documents dated just weeks before my accident. My name, my signature, or something like it signed on an increased life insurance plan. The beneficiary, Richard Hill. But there was a second policy, hidden behind it. This one, under Richard's name. Beneficiary, Susan Miller. I sat there for a long time, staring at both papers, 2 policies, both signed days apart. My stomach turned. Had the accident been a coincidence, or something planned to clear debts and build a new life? Downstairs, Clara was making tea when she found me pale and shaking. "Mom, what's wrong?" I handed her the papers. "He insured me, Clara." Then himself, with her as beneficiary. She stared at them, disbelief turning into horror. "You think he—" "I don't think," I said quietly. "I know he had reason. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like the past returning to finish what it started. Around midnight, my phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. There's more you don't know. Meet me where it happened. My throat went dry. "Richard. I didn't tell Clara. I didn't call the police. Some part of me needed to look him in the eye one last time to hear what he had to say. I drove out toward the ravine where everything began. The moon was thin and cold, silvering the snow and the twisted guardrail that still bore scars from the crash. He was there, standing by his old truck, his face drawn and older than I remembered. The night wrapped around us like a confession waiting to be spoken. "I didn't kill you," he said before I could speak. "I swear I didn't." "You left me to die," I replied. That's not so different." He looked away, ashamed. "I was in shock. I thought you were gone. I went for help, but by the time I came back, the car was burning. I thought it was too late." "And the insurance?" I asked coldly. "The policies? Susan?" His eyes flickered. "That wasn't about money. I was trying to make sure she was taken care of if I went to prison for manslaughter. It was an accident." "Then why forge my signature?" He froze. "What?" I held up the papers. "That's not my handwriting." He stared at the documents like they were snakes. "I didn't, Margaret, I swear." A sound cut through the wind. A low, deliberate click. I turned. A figure stepped from the shadows, a flashlight in hand, coat pulled tight. "Marina, don't move," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard everything." "Marina," I whispered. "What are you—" "She was my daughter," she said, eyes glistening with grief and rage. "And you," she pointed the flashlight at Richard, "you left her there. You let them call her dead without even asking who she was." Richard held up his hands. "I didn't know. She called me that night," Marina shouted, her voice breaking. "She told me she'd picked up a man on the road who was hurt, that he needed help. She said his name was Richard Hill." Then the line went dead. My breath caught. She was the one who found you? He stared, stunned. I don't remember. She died trying to help you. Marina's voice rose like a storm. And you let them bury her under someone else's name. She stepped closer. Her hand trembled. You ruined both our lives. Marina, please, I said softly. Put it down. Don't do this. Tears streamed down her face. You got to live, Margaret, but my Anna never will. For a moment I thought she might pull the trigger or collapse, but then the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, blue lights flickering through the trees. Marina dropped the flashlight and fell to her knees, sobbing. Richard exhaled shakily, his breath fogging the air. I didn't mean for any of this. The officers reached us moments later, voices sharp, lights flashing across snow and metal. They pulled Marina to her feet gently, leading her away. I watched in silence as she disappeared into the blur of blue light. Before they took him, Richard turned to me. I didn't kill you, he whispered again, but maybe I should have, because living with this is worse. I looked at him one last time and said, No, Richard. Living without truth is worse. As the police cars drove away, I stood there alone on that frozen road, the same one that had swallowed my life once before. But this time, I wasn't the one who vanished. And yet, deep in my chest, I knew there was still one secret left beneath that snow, one that no one had spoken yet, because something about that night still didn't add up. For weeks after that night, I lived in a quiet haze, half relief, half exhaustion, as though every breath came from borrowed air. The world finally knew the truth. I wasn't dead. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a ghost who stumbled home. But being alive again came with a weight heavier than the grave I'd left behind. Richard was charged with obstruction, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The papers called it the widow's scandal, as if it were some twisted fairy tale. He refused lawyers, barely spoke in custody, and on the day of his arraignment he simply told the judge, I deserve whatever happens. Susan disappeared entirely. Her sister's death, Anna's death, had destroyed her as much as the truth had destroyed me. The last anyone saw of her, she'd checked out of a motel 2 towns over and left her car behind with the keys still inside. It didn't surprise me. Guilt has a way of erasing people just as surely as death does. But for me, the story wasn't over, because something still whispered in the back of my mind every night before sleep, the question that started it all. Who was in my car? The police believed it had been Anna Cole, but something about Marina's story kept scratching at me. Anna had called her mother during the storm, saying she'd stopped to help a man on the road, a man who said his name was Richard Hill. Yet, when the police pulled the wreckage from the ravine, the passenger door had been locked from the inside, and only my seatbelt had been unbuckled. Someone had buckled her in. I started spending my afternoons in the county archives, flipping through weather logs, accident reports, and local news clippings. Most people avoided me now, the woman who came back from the dead, the one who couldn't let things rest. But I didn't care. I needed the missing piece. Then, one afternoon, I found it. Buried in a forgotten file was an old towing receipt, dated the night after the storm. A local farmer had reported seeing 2 vehicles near the ravine before authorities arrived, one of them a dark-colored pickup that left the scene before sunrise. The make and model matched Richard's old truck. He hadn't just left after the crash, he'd come back. And that meant the fire, the confusion, the burned body, all of it might have been staged. The thought hit me like a fever. I went to the storage lot where the remnants of my old car still sat, rusting and forgotten. A young officer helped me sign in. The wreck looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, the way memories do when you see them in daylight. But when I crouched by the twisted frame, something glinted between the melted seat springs. I reached in and pulled out a warped piece of metal, half a keychain, the engraved part still legible. R. H. Not mine, Richard's. I closed my hand around it, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Why would his keychain be on my side of the car unless he'd been there longer than he admitted? Unless he'd gone back to make sure no one would ever find out what really happened. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the evidence in front of me. The keychain, the insurance papers, the police report. Clara stood by the stove, watching me quietly. "Mom," she said, "you have to stop digging." "It's over." "It's not over," I said. "He came back to that car after the crash, after I was gone." "Then why?" she asked softly. "To erase her," I said. "To erase them both." Her eyes widened. "You think he burned the car on purpose?" I nodded slowly. He couldn't risk anyone finding her alive or finding out he was there with her. So he went back, doused it with gasoline, made sure everything inside was unrecognizable. Then he let the world believe it was me. Clara's hands trembled. "That's murder, Mom." "Yes," I said, "but proving it now is almost impossible. And he's already paying for everything else." Still, I couldn't rest. A week later, I went to the prison. I needed to hear it from him. Needed to look into his eyes and see if the man I'd loved for 40 years still existed somewhere behind the guilt. He was thinner, quieter, almost unrecognizable. When he saw me through the glass, he smiled faintly, a broken thing, like the ghost of a man. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I need to know the truth," I replied. "All of it." He exhaled slowly, staring at his hands. "I went back," he said finally. "After I got to town, I told myself it was to check if anyone else was hurt, but it was guilt. I needed to see." He paused, voice trembling. "She was alive when I got there, Margaret." I froze. "Anna?" He nodded, barely breathing. I tried to pull her out, but the flames were spreading fast. I panicked. He swallowed hard. I told myself it was too late, that she'd die anyway. I couldn't let anyone find her in my car. I couldn't let the world know what I'd done. So I left her there. I let her burn. The room spun, my throat tightening. "And me? You'd already been rescued," he whispered. "They found you half a mile away in the snow, unconscious. I didn't even know until the police called days later. But by then, the story had already begun, and I didn't stop it." Tears blurred my vision. "You could have told the truth." "I tried," he said weakly. "Once. But then Susan begged me not to. She said her sister deserved peace, that no one needed to know. I thought keeping silent was mercy. He looked up, eyes hollow. It wasn't mercy. It was cowardice. I stared at him for a long time, every heartbeat echoing the life we'd built together and the wreckage it had become. "You buried me to save yourself," I said. He nodded once. "Yes." When I left the prison, the sky was turning gold with evening. I stood outside for a long while, breathing in the cold air. The truth was heavier than I expected, but also freeing. In the weeks that followed, I met with Marina again. We arranged for Anna's proper burial under her real name. The headstone was simple: Anna Cole, 1999, 2024. She tried to save a stranger. We stood there together in silence, two women bound by tragedy, but finally at peace. "She saved him," Marina whispered. "And in some twisted way, she saved you too." I nodded. Maybe that's what she was meant to do. When I returned home, I stood in my garden, the one that had been trimmed and changed while I was gone. I began planting new roses where the old ones had been, pressing each root into the cold earth like a promise. Life had come full circle. I had been buried, mourned, replaced, and reborn. My past had burned, but I was still here, breathing, healing, learning to forgive. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my dreams, the girl who tried to help, whispering through the crackle of fire, "You're still alive. Don't waste it." So I don't. I bake again. I read to Daniel on the porch. I smile at the neighbors who once pitied me. And when I walk past the cemetery, I stop between two graves, mine and Anna's, and I leave fresh flowers for both of us. Because though one story ended in ashes, another began in survival. I was declared dead once, but the truth brought me back to life, and this time I intend to live every second of it.